anything else you need?
I don't think Speaker this month, 12:30 promptly. It's an informal event, so if you need to run to class, please feel free to do that. And once we reveal the bird of September, we do have bird of the month pins that you can take with you and collect every single month. So some incentives to come back. In October, we're super excited. To welcome Brandon Taylor, who's a visiting assistant professor in chemistry, who's also leading a project to do an inventory of birds colliding with windows on campus. So he'll be here talking to us about bird mortality on campus. Okay, wait, that's so much more morbid than I intended. In November, we're welcoming Jason Nowicki, who is the archivist of the Maine Women's Writers Collection at the University of New England, but he's also a poet. And I think, rumor has it, he's going to be writing an occasion poem for the page during November. And then in December, Jill Osgood, who is a master Maine naturalist as well as a book artist, will be coming and rounding out our fall semester. We'll take a break in January and come back for the spring semester. So if you or anyone you know is super enthusiastic about birds, Audubon, book culture, and you want to try out, being a guest speaker, please reach out to me again. I'm Marika. Let's see, anything else? Thank you for indulging our construction. I think in October maybe it'll be done. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And that's a new office space and lobby area. I'm curious about what's happening there. Yeah, shall we? Yeah. So let me introduce our guest speaker, and then we're going to open this case, and we're going to flip the bird. Woo! Thank you. Emma is our guest speaker. We're so delighted to have her here. She is Emma Olney is originally from Pennsylvania, and she's a sophomore at Bowdoin College. She intends to major in environmental studies and has spent her summer on Kent Island in New Brunswick, Canada, doing forestry research on conifer seedlings and mosses. We talked a little bit about it being a moss girl summer this summer. Yeah. Emma is also interested in how the natural sciences intersect with different fields. For example, this summer, she wrote a supplemental set of poems for the forestry class she surveyed to be read alongside her data. She has written several published articles and op-eds on the ruffed grouse and its connection to climate change and wildlife diseases, as well as on hunting policy in Pennsylvania. In her free time, Emma enjoys getting outdoors, reading and writing, and running her WBOR Riot Girl, i.e. feminist punk rock, radio show at Bowdoin. We don't know what time that is yet, but tune back in. So Emma, thank you for being here. We are going to say goodbye to what Audubon refers to as the red-winged starling or marsh blackbird, but what we now today call the red-winged blackbird. Kat and I are not using gloves because we actually lose a sense of tactility, and the fibers in the gloves tend to, you're more likely to tear the paper. So our hands are clean. The tissue paper is an interleaving. You can see a little bit of the ghosting happening here. And woo! Welcome, the Republican or Cliff Swallow. I'm going to give those to you. And I'm going to turn things over to Emma. Please feel free to come on in close and look closely.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. I'm super, super excited to talk about birds and books and history and how the two connect. I think this is a super, super cool print of the cliff swallow. I think it sort of looks a bit alien-like, little extraterrestrial action, especially because of the nests, I think, look really interesting. I think it's awesome that they included an egg. I think that obviously provokes a little bit that you can interpret on your own. But I think it's really, really cool. And the first thing that I thought of when I saw this print in this historical book by Audubon was thinking about how history can be like a way to immortalize a lot of things. But then I thought about also how nature is something that's a bit timeless. It doesn't really have a lot of bounds, yet somehow the two, history and nature, intersect quite often, as we can see by this huge Audubon's Bird of America book. So for this picture, like I said, it's very detailed. Audubon hand sketched all of these, and then he sent it off to be hand watercolored, which is really, really cool. I think this print in particular evokes a lot of life and movement, which is something that you would want for a nature drawing. But at the same time, it is impossible to depict nature perfectly or comprehensively because this is a still image and nature is constantly moving and transforming. So what I wanted to talk about is that how history can actually be a really crucial part of the, I guess, eternal transformation of nature. Even though it is sort of a fixation in time, it can really reveal a lot about how nature moves constantly and how we interact with nature and are influenced and influence nature over time. So this book was published between the 1820s and 30s, and this set of prints has been on display continually in Bowdoin College since the 1950s. And the timing is especially important when we look at this bird, the cliff swallow. I did a little bit of research about this bird once I found out which bird I was going to be presenting. And when you consider the cliff swallow, you'll know that this print was actually written on the print is that it was from Cincinnati, Ohio, May 30th, 1820. So obviously this is sort of in the middle, but also kind of tail end of the Industrial Revolution, which becomes important when you realize that cliff swallows originally built their nests out of mud in colonies on vertical surfaces with a little bit of overhead protection. But now their species range has expanded a lot in North America because they've adapted to start building their nests on human-made infrastructure, like bridges, barns. And so you can sort of imagine that was what was sort of starting to happen right around the time that this was being sketched and painted and put into this book. I find that really, really interesting. So this stagnant part of history that could be considered stagnant, I guess, it's fixed, but it really belies a lot of movement if you think about the history of the cliff swallow and how it interacts with us throughout time. Just a few other interesting facts about the cliff swallow that I learned that I would love to share. They're long-distance migrants, so they winter in the southern parts of South America. And they do that every year. They migrate in flocks, and they return to San Juan Capistrano, California every spring, which actually seems sort of like a famous event. I don't know if anyone's from California. I'm not, but it seems like it's sort of a well-known event that people really look forward to. The eggs are incubated for 14 to 16 days by parents, which is also kind of interesting. And the young leave the nest 21 to 23 days after hatching. So this idea of history intersecting with nature and how it can really show us the transformation that happens in nature can be applied a little bit closer to home, considering on what you think of as close. Is only, let's see, a car ride from Brunswick to Canada, a ferry ride, a lobster boat ride, I call that the yacht ride sometimes, and a trek across a muddy basin that requires very tall boots. So pretty close, all things considered. And Kent Island is a really integral part of Bowdoin's history and also Audubon's history, which I didn't know when I was saying, but I learned afterwards. So Bowdoin College has owned Kent Island since the 1930s. J. Sterling Rockefeller actually sold it to Bowdoin College for $1 on the condition that it be maintained as a bird sanctuary. And so this island sponsors a lot of different types of research, but it really mainly focuses on birds. And if anyone has ever been, you can really tell, like the entire island is just sort of lit up by sounds of birds all the time, every single day, all night. Like I slept above a petrel lab, for example, that's a bird. And also the whole night you can hear the herring gulls fighting and scrabbling on the roof. So that's just an example. I loved it. So we do research on a bunch of different species of birds. So we do herring gull research. A Yale PhD student did a lot of research on that this summer, which I helped out with. He was looking at life history and social evolution. We do a long-standing research on savanna sparrows, most famously the Leach's storm petrel. That is what Kent Island is really known for the most. And that's actually one of the most long-standing studies on birds in the world. And also the last one is tree swallows, sort of similar. So I was there for forestry and moss research, but when you spend 2 months on a bird sanctuary research island, you also spend a lot of time with birds. So I helped to set up a lot of the tree swallow boxes, helped to like finalize the building of them, and then set them up in a pre-established island-wide grid that they use for a study on tree swallows. And then I also helped to band the tree swallow nestlings and measure like their wingspan and their tarsus length, which is like their leg bone. And that was actually, the banding was probably one of the highlights of the summer, because it feels really special when you're able to hold like 6 or 7 nestlings in one hand, and they're almost see-through because of how young they are. You can feel their heart like just thrumming in your hand. I mean, they're scared, but it is really cool to feel and to see. They're like blind. It's really, really cool. Relating back to Audubon, so I learned recently that Audubon actually visited Kent Island, which is located in the Bay of Fundy, by the way. He visited that island in the 1830s, so before Bowdoin even had a connection to the island. And what he did was he grabbed a bunch of Bowdoin scholars. He took a crew up north, and they spent some time exploring Kent Island and then the neighboring islands, Hay and Sheep Island, which I also spent some time on this summer. And he spent like the better part of a day just having his Bowdoin scholars traipse through the woods and the fields, looking for birds to sketch for Birds of America. He sat back. He did most of the sketching, which is understandable. But when you can look at his accounts of the island, and he says that they spent the day going through the open fields of Kent Island and the white spruce forests, and that really resonated with me because that was exactly what I saw this summer, nearly 200 years later. I slept many nights in the fields under the stars, like next to the ocean, and I spent every single day, 8 hours a day, in those white spruce woods studying spruces. So the land hasn't changed that much. And we only know that because of Audubon's historical moment in time. And every summer, students can now add back a point of reflection and reference, adding their own historical moment to understand how this land changes, if it does. Some questions that I have is specifically what bird species were present on Kent Island in the 1800s, and maybe how the bird populations have been influenced by our management or research since then. And we get a lot of that from our data, but there's some things that really can only be told from history, before our research started, with Audubon. And one thing also that I think is pretty important is I would say that nature sort of forces us to finally think beyond the frame of the present and look toward the future. So nature is inextricably tied with history, like we've discussed, but it's also tied very, very closely with the future. And the cliff swallow is another great example of that. So obviously we've seen it change since this print was even made to now, and where they nest and how their range has expanded. But now we know that they are also at risk, like many other species are, because of climate change. For example, with an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, they are more susceptible to spring heat waves endangering the nestlings. And with 3 degrees Celsius increase, they're susceptible to their nests could be damaged by wildfires. And if that happens repeatedly, then they really can't use that habitat anymore. So it seems sort of like a constant flux. Like they've succeeded because of our intervention in the present day, because they have more places to nest and more protection. But who knows, they might suffer greatly because of human-caused climate change. Oh, and actually, I thought this was really interesting. I found already an example of that happening. A spring heat wave was actually recorded recently as killing half of cliff swallow population over a single 6-day event. So it's already sort of happening. And yeah, so I think that history really does highlight the flexibility, the transformation, and even the timelessness of nature. And the cliff swallow is a really, really good example of how history shows us how they've been changing, how it's not fixed, and what happens next. So thank you so much for listening. I would love to talk more about any sort of bird. I love birds. I love history, and I love the woods too. So if anyone has any questions or just wants to talk, I would be more than happy to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. We can do questions kind of in a group. If any of you have to, it is about 12:45, just after 12:45. If you need to leave, feel free to do so. And don't forget to take your cliff swallow button with you so that you can carry that cliff swallow around with you. Emma, thank you again so much for joining us. And if there are any questions, maybe we can lob some at you.
Where was that heat wave?
Okay, I actually don't know. That's so bad, but I really don't know. It was on a website that I was looking for cliff swallows, and they didn't mention it. That's my bad. But I can get back to you if you want to talk about it later.
I'm sure I can find it.
Okay, yeah.
A quick question, do they have more than one clutch in a season? They're not up here this far for that long. They come like in May, and by August they're beginning to leave, so.
Wait, sorry, what was your question?
Do they have more than one clutch in
Oh,
a season?
gotcha. I'm actually not sure. I mean, I'm not an expert on cliff swallows. I just kind of learned a little bit more about that for this. From what I found, didn't mention multiple clutches. I mean, it totally could be possible. I know other birds do that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
They're not here that long, so.
Yeah. I don't know. Like maybe some of that has to do with by the time they migrate down south. I'm not sure. That's a great question.
Will you tell us how you got into birding?
Yeah. I would say, so in my freshman year of high school, I went to this camp in Pennsylvania called the Wildlife Leadership Academy, and they there's 5 or 6 different camps that focus on Pennsylvania species. So I originally applied to go to the white-tailed deer camp, but they didn't have enough room, so I went to the ruffed grouse camp instead. I was majorly sad about that, but I went there and I absolutely loved it. I don't know, I think that I always loved going outside and stuff like that, and I didn't really realize how closely tied a bird species would be to their habitat. So instead of just learning more about this bird, which we did, we went outside in the woods every day and talked about managing habitat for this bird or looking physically where they spend their time. and I fell in love with the ruffed grouse after that, and I became much more interested in other birds too. So, yeah. Thank you.
Where was that when you were working with rough grouse?
It was in Pennsylvania. So are you from Pennsylvania? Is that what you're asking?
I'm from Connecticut. That's
Okay.
something weird about the rough grouse. My dad used to live where I live in Connecticut, and there used to be enough rough grouse to hunt.
Yeah.
And now there are pretty much none, except in really secluded places like
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Yeah, that is something very interesting too. This was in like western Pennsylvania, but one thing that's really interesting, I don't know if it's similar in Connecticut, but in Pennsylvania, they found that West Nile virus has really decimated a lot of the rough grouse population, and that was since 2001. And since then, you can really see like when they track it, it looks like hills and valleys like since 2001, and they determined that it's because of West Nile virus. So that's like what they're actively working on, and that's like they've been using like hunting to also manage like positively. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, be sure to move in close and take a good look at the bird of the month and our cliff swallows. And be sure to come back next month, October 7th. Brandon Taylor will be here from the history club. Thank you all. And feel free to linger too.